For 2 whole centuries, they were this incredible mix of faith, raw ambition, and just brutal violence. A series of holy wars that pitted Christian Europe against the Muslim world, all for control of a pretty small but incredibly sacred piece of land. We've all heard the romanticized stories, this epic clash of civilizations, but the real story of the Crusades? Oh, it's so much more complicated, way more contradictory, and honestly, a lot more human. So let's unravel some of those myths and really dig into what happened.
So, what were the Crusades really? I mean, were they these deeply pious pilgrimages, like some have argued, just driven by a pure desire to see the holy sites? Or were they straight up military campaigns fueled by a thirst for land and riches? Was it a noble mission to protect fellow Christians, or just a cynical power play by ambitious popes and princes? Well, as you can probably guess, the truth is tangled up somewhere in the middle. And to understand how it all kicked off, we've got to look at a world that was basically on a collision course.
Right, so the call for the First Crusade didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It wasn't like someone just woke up one day and decided to invade. No, this was the explosive result of centuries of shifting borders, deep religious divides, and the rise of new powers that were setting the stage for a conflict that would literally change the relationship between East and West forever.
Okay, so this timeline basically shows the long fuse leading to a massive explosion. For hundreds of years, even when Jerusalem was under Muslim rule, Christian pilgrims could usually visit. But the real game changer was in 1071, at a battle called Manzikert. A new rising power, the Seljuk Turks, just shattered the army of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. This was an absolute catastrophe. It opened up their heartland to invasion and left the Byzantines in a desperate fight for their very survival.
So the Byzantine emperor, totally panicked, sends a message to the West asking for help, basically for some elite knights to act as mercenaries. But here's the twist. The message lands on the desk of Pope Urban II. And he doesn't just see a crisis, he sees a golden opportunity. He realized he could take all this violent energy from Europe's knights, who were constantly fighting each other, and point them at a common enemy. In doing that, he could assert the power of the Pope over all of Christianity, East and West.
At the Council of Clermont, Urban gives this speech that is an absolute masterpiece of political and religious spin. He brilliantly combined two incredibly powerful ideas, a military campaign and a religious pilgrimage. This wasn't just war, he told them. It was an act of holy penance. The prize wasn't just land or glory, it was the complete forgiveness of all your sins. Now, for the violent, God-fearing knights of medieval Europe, this was an offer they literally could not refuse.
And so they went. I mean, tens of thousands of people, from the richest lords to the poorest peasants. They sewed crosses on their clothes and just marched east. It was a chaotic, messy, often brutal wave of humanity. And nobody, especially not the established Muslim powers in the region, expected what was about to happen. Because against all the odds, the First Crusade was a stunning, shocking success. In the summer of 1099, after this grueling campaign and a desperate siege, the Crusaders broke through the walls of Jerusalem. The capture of the Holy City was a massive military victory, for sure, but it was also a horrific bloodbath, so bad it shocked even the people writing about it at the time. To the Crusaders, though, this victory against impossible odds felt like nothing less than a miracle. It was proof to them that God was truly on their side.
So how on earth did they pull it off? Well, first, you can never underestimate the power of that religious passion. These guys truly believed they were soldiers for Christ. Second, they had the total element of surprise. But the crucial factor, the real reason it worked, was the political mess they stumbled into. The Muslim world at the time was deeply divided between the Sunni Seljuk Turks in Syria and the Shiite Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt. These two were bitter rivals, and they absolutely refused to unite against the invaders, which created this power vacuum the Crusaders just marched right through.
And the Crusaders didn't just conquer Jerusalem and go home. Nope, they stayed. They set up shop, creating 4 European-style feudal states right in the heart of the Middle East. They called this area Outremer, which just means the land beyond the sea. But, building these little kingdoms was one thing. Holding on to them, that was going to be a whole different story. The creation of these Crusader states completely changed the game. Suddenly, this wasn't just a one-off expedition, it was a permanent state of war. Both sides had to adapt, they had to innovate, creating new institutions and new ideas that would end up fueling a century-long arms race of faith. So, on the Christian side, you get this radical new idea, the military orders. The Knights Templar, the Hospitallers, these guys were warrior monks, men sworn to poverty and chastity, whose only job was to defend the Holy Land. They became the elite, professional backbone of the Crusader armies. In response, the Muslim world starts to unify under leaders who use the idea of jihad, or holy struggle, and turn it into this powerful political tool to rally their divided peoples against the Franks, as they called the Europeans. And the climax of this Muslim counter-crusade came under one of the most legendary figures in history, the Kurdish Sultan Saladin. He was a brilliant strategist and a brilliant politician. He managed to unite Egypt and Syria under his rule, completely surrounding the Crusader states. Then in 1187, at the Battle of Hattin, he just annihilated their army and did what the Muslim world had been dreaming of for almost 100 years. He recaptured Jerusalem. That staggering loss sent a shockwave across Europe and kicked off the most famous crusade of them all. Now, the Third Crusade, the one with Richard the Lionheart, was legendary, but it didn't actually manage to retake Jerusalem. But it's the Fourth Crusade that really shows how that original religious ideal could get twisted by greed and politics, and it led to one of the most bizarre and, frankly, tragic episodes in all of medieval history. This is where things go completely off the rails. So how did a holy mission go so horribly wrong? Well, it all started with a contract. The Crusaders needed a massive fleet, so they hired the maritime superpower of Venice to build it. But only about a third of the knights actually showed up, so they couldn't pay the enormous bill. The Venetians, being very shrewd business people, proposed a little detour. Help us attack our Christian trade rival, the city of Zara, and we'll call it even for now. Desperate, the Crusaders agreed. Then, still broke, they got sucked into a Byzantine power struggle, which ended with the Crusader army brutally sacking Constantinople, the greatest Christian city on the planet. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. This is the ultimate tragic irony. A crusade that was originally launched to help Eastern Christians ended up delivering its death blow. The sack of Constantinople was a complete catastrophe that the Byzantine Empire never really recovered from. It was a mortal wound that left them vulnerable to their final collapse centuries later. And the holy war against the Muslims? It never even happened. After the moral disaster of the Fourth Crusade, the whole movement kind of lost its way. The Crusader states back in the Holy Land were basically living on borrowed time, fighting a losing battle for survival. And their eventual fall left behind this really complex question that historians are still debating. After 2 centuries of all this bloodshed, who actually won? For almost 200 years, those Crusader kingdoms clung to the coast. But one by one, their cities fell to new, incredibly disciplined Muslim powers, especially the Mamluks, this powerful slave soldier dynasty that was now running Egypt. The final act came in 1291, with the brutal fall of the city of Acre, their last major capital. The European experiment in the Middle East was officially over. On the surface, the answer seems pretty obvious, right? The Crusaders got kicked out, so the Muslim powers won. End of story. But if you start looking at the results from a few different angles, the picture gets way, way more complicated. Okay, let's break down the verdict. Militarily, it's a clear victory for the Muslim powers. They accomplished their main goal, they expelled the invaders. But what about economically? Well, the big winners there were the Italian city-states. Venice, Genoa, Pisa. They built vast commercial empires on the back of this whole conflict. And religiously, it was a profound failure for the papacy. Its ultimate goal of holding Jerusalem was lost, and the Fourth Crusade created this bitter, permanent divide between Catholic and Orthodox Christians that is never really healed. The wars themselves ended more than 700 years ago, but they carved these deep scars into the map and into the collective memory of multiple civilizations. They left behind a really complex legacy of mistrust and conflict, but also, surprisingly, of cultural and economic exchange that reshaped the world. So in a lot of ways, the story of the Crusades never really ended in 1291. And that brings us to the final big thought. The language of crusade and jihad, the symbols of the cross and the crescent, they still echo really loudly in modern politics. The memory of these ancient wars, which is often simplified and distorted and romanticized, continues to be used and abused for all sorts of modern-day agendas. And it leaves us with a pretty provocative question. Are we still living in the long shadow of the Crusades?